the JORC Code and the upcoming amendments that are likely to happen. And I'm joined by Steve Hunt and Rod Carlson. Steve is Executive Lead Technical for AMC and also Chair of the JORC Committee. Also Rod Carlson, GM for AMC in our Brisbane office and ex-officio member of the JORC Committee. So first off, how's the conference going, and how do you feel about being back live with an audience?
Oh, it's fabulous. There's a really hot vibe here in Brisbane, where everybody's really upbeat. There's lots of catches up with old colleagues and people we are dying to meet and are really open to discussions. There's lots of good conversations. The papers are really good quality and an interesting mix of technical papers and discussions around papers that are online. So we've got a good mix of presence from the majors and a few minors. And yeah, look, the whole conference it's got a good feel about it, hasn't it, Steve?
Yeah, it's a really good conference, this one. Interestingly, a lot of the people that are here, the last proper conference in face-to-face they went to was this same mining geology conference in Perth in later 2019. And so there's a whole bunch of people here that have been stuck in their home office for a couple of years and just really enjoying the interaction. And I think it's actually lifted the quality of a lot of the papers and presentations too. So yeah, a day and a bit in, but really good.
Sounds good. I think generally the industry seems to be opening up some more, and we'll start to see similar events propagate around Australia and around the world. So getting to the topic for today, it's the status of the code review. Perhaps if we start with you, Steve, and if you can just give us an update on where the review is at and perhaps some initial ideas.
Yeah, look, thanks, Mark. Like a lot of things in the last 2 years, COVID knocked us around. One of the last face-to-face meetings we had in JORC with people in the room was about 2 years ago today. And we set out a plan for a series of public engagements around kicking off the JORC Code review. And before we knew it, we're in lockdown and we knew public meetings weren't going to happen. And so in that period, sort of leading in, we really had to go and find a way to do it differently. So we had to design and run an online survey process, and that went through and followed through into the beginning of last year. During the course of last year, we then looked at the areas that were hotspots around the code update, and throughout the year we run working groups to really explore how we could address those various issues. And so we've got a pretty good idea of both where there's pretty high satisfaction with the way the code is currently set up and where the hotspots are. And so we're working through that now. And those are areas that probably resonate with a lot of people. There was a lot of discussion, good and bad, around competency. There are certainly hotspots around risk, around ESG, around the reasonable prospects test under JORC, and around some structural things in the code as well, the way we structure the code, the way it should be more user-friendly from a modern web-based format, areas like reconciliation and the like. I think we've got to understand that the current version of the code now is 2012. It's nearly 10 years old. It's very much a reflection of the stresses of that period of time, and it hasn't been calibrated to anything since. And so, for instance, we're currently running on the first version of the If Not, Why Not, Show Us the Table 1. And that hasn't been edited now in a decade. So there are things that are maintenance, but there are some emerging hotspots as well.
Yeah. Have you got a feel for how wide the responses have been from people across the contributing groups, the AIG, AusIMM. Do you have a feel for how many submissions you've had? Has it been a really wide-ranging discussion?
So we have over, for our online survey, which closed about this time last year, but we had 500 odd submissions. And so a lot of those were individual submissions, but we had companies, we had consulting groups put in their own submissions, and we got those from actually not just Australian-centric organisations, but we tend to forget in Australia that there are Australian companies and consulting companies that are reporting on projects all around the world that still use JORC as their primary code. We also had cross submissions from other Crisco reporting code groups into that mix as well. And in terms of then, as we got into those hotspot areas and set up the working groups, we ended up involving around 45 or 50 people into the various sub-working groups to work through on the various areas. And so, you know, most of those groups had one or two JORC committee members plus another, 4 to even 10 or 12. And so the largest group being the ESG reviews, because we broke that into environmental and social and the governmental piece as 3 separate strands before we stitched it back together. So, you know, we've tried to reach out. We're getting to an interesting stage right now. We'll have a session here at the conference tomorrow around the competency discussion, and that'll be, a nice test the water forum, and that's co-sponsored by the AIG and the AusIMM to really pick apart the members' feelings around the competency issue. So, we're looking forward to being able to see more people in person, but that's been quite a lot of work for the various people involved over the last 12 months.
Yeah. I think the key thing is that we have to engage, as a board member of the AIG, it's our role as the board to engage with the membership and to try and, especially in the competency space, which is going to be driven by or controlled by the member bodies, the AusIMM and the AIG, and those aspects of the competency and the measurement of competency and how it's applied to membership is this probably the most complex of all of the issues to implement within the industry. There are other organisations that do it. For example, the RPEQ in Queensland are definitely a group that apply measurement to their membership, but they've got legislation backing them. So I think in the JORC code we've got a set of codes, but not necessarily the legislation. So the trick will be to ensure that we bring the memberships along for the ride, so that they feel engaged, so that they are prepared to make the changes that they will be required to make in the future.
Yeah.
Do you have plans to, provide feedback the other way to other professional organisations that perhaps use information from the JORC reports that we prepare, so that analysts and financial industry are better able to understand what's in those reports and what it actually means? So is there some means of trying to improve other aspects that are outside our direct control?
Yes, Mark. One of the working groups that was actually set up was with the analysts group. So we have one of our JORC committee members who's got a background in that area, and we set up and we engaged with representatives of that area to test the water. The other thing I've done in the last latter part of last year is I've had a one-on-one engagement with the mines department or the geological survey of every state of Australia and New Zealand, plus the national bodies, who are users of JORC reports, right? So the non-market users is also an area we've reached out to and understand their stress points in terms of transparency of key information and where they feel some of the issues are. So we've tried to be quite broad, and try not to structurally miss out on anyone. But we've got another full round of public engagement as sort of the draft code solidifies, and that'll run closer to mid-year, and we'll take that back out, and everyone will be able to kick our tyres a bit or say why it shouldn't apply to them, which should be fun.
Yeah. I think but along the way there'll be feedback to ASIC to ensure that, because at the end of the day, they're the people that need to be confident that the code has been written in a way that's appropriate for their requirements. So there'll be certainly a piece there where they'll need to assess it, and we'll have to incorporate feedback from them along the way.
Yeah, so we had our last phone conference with ASIC in January, so we're keeping them abreast of how things are developing. And I think, there's no silver bullets in the code. I think a lot of it is quite good, but there are, it's a mesh of improvements that acting together, lift us and keep the focus on where the risk is, and trying to remind everyone is that the code isn't for technical professionals, it's for investors that are putting their hard-earned money on the table to invest in those mineral properties and mining developments. We've also had direct discussions with the other Crisco groups and a number of other internationals at the same time. So it's trying to meet as such a broader base as we can, but and going for the maximum overlap where it's applicable, but not change for change's sake either. So it's
I guess the relationship between the JORC committee and ASIC's quite strong in Australia. Do you see other Crisco organisations forming similar sorts of bonds with their own users of the information, whether it's a stock market or other groups? Is that something that we should be looking at? Yeah.
Well, I think the alignment in Canada is particularly strong. The Canadian regulators, we actually, as a JORC committee, had a discussion with them last year too. So, no one wants to quite break the good alignment with the Crisco, with the common DNA codes around the world. They've got a different label on the front, but the key definitions, the key ideas of competent person or qualified person sign off, the classification names. We try and keep all this stuff aligned because we can't go and really being confusing investors that operate in more than one market. And the way that these updates tend to happen is that there are elements that come out of someone's code update that get picked up in the next time and then embellished the next time after. So there's a series of progressive changes through the code. And so a good example would be the JORC 2012 code had a table 1 in it. When SAMREC in South Africa was updated next after us, they did a similar, if not why not, table 1 within their code, and that's progressed, through PERC and the like.
It's good to see the SEC is standardised a little bit closer to what we...
So the SK 1300 in the US, which was remarkably different from all the Crisco codes, has adopted a very aligned, not perfectly aligned, but a very aligned model into the US. And I think that's really important because you can't have the idea that something that might be called an inferred resource means something entirely different in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
Right? And that it's backed up by a competent or qualified person sign off, and that there's a process behind that, and the definitions have the same fundamental meaning. It's really good, because otherwise, you get an apples, oranges, and pears with stuff by the same name, and that would not do our industry anywhere any good.
What do you see the main focus of ESG being? Because I mean, that's the one big piece in the code update that is very light on in the 2012 code. What do you see ESG being in the future, do you think?
Look, I think the change in the last 10 years and continuing has been strong. I think all the seed was there, but I think traditionally we used to evaluate a mining opportunity by saying, does the geology make sense, and is there a mining process that makes money? And if it's technical and economic, we're good. Well, actually, no. If it's not investable, in the broader sense of investable from a government permitting point of view, for an ability to raise money on the market, or your local stakeholders won't engage or say no to that project option, is, don't be out there suggesting that you've got an ore reserve that neither government or local stakeholders or your investors are interested in, because actually there is no funding and there is no forward progress. And so that's become much more pointy end. There's been a lot of improvement in the industry. Our code was very much a 2012 version of the world. And so we're not suggesting that the key principles of the code are any different. But if these are material issues, then it's the calibration of that disclosure in the code, when you put out an ore reserve, for instance, needs to be there. And if there are pre-existing conditions that you're aware of back at the resource stage, then it's always been that the competent person shouldn't remain silent on those. And so there's a prompting within the code will come through. Adopting international ESG standards has been part of the discussion, but they are not settled. So the fallback position is always to describe what you're doing and how you're managing risk. And if people can name check that, for instance, they've done their tailings dam, to the international tailings standards that have been developed in recent years, that's fantastic. But where there's still everything's mixing and missing, just tell people what you're doing, and then, because the investors, they've got this stuff on their list, they want to know, and so do the homework, and the list is changing. What's the carbon footprint of your new mining process? Are you going to have an electric underground mining fleet? If you've got a cogeneration on site and a solar farm, people are asking those things. And so what's the most economic, least footprint version of the mining plan could be critical on whether you get the investment funds or not.
Yeah. I guess there's a key overlap there about investability that you were talking of earlier, and how far the responsibility of the competent person goes to determining what investability means, and your ability to raise funds, because it does mean different things to different people and different sizes of companies that are moving into projects. So how far do we, as a competent person, how far am I supposed to go in understanding what a company might be able to raise on the market or through say, debt or equity?
Look, I think the bigger question is actually communication of risk. That's one of the focuses of the papers in the conference this year. Is not only are you expected, the expectation is that you can communicate risk. I mean, traditionally, geologists would communicate risk through the classification. It was indicated, inferred, or measured, and that was the only risk classification that the person reading the report had to judge it on. But a lot of the papers in the conference today are about showing risk and uncertainty and using simulations and options and variants to show, well, hang on, if you try doing it this 100 different ways, this is the most likely way, but you could be anywhere between here and here. As geologists and mining engineers, we fully understand that risk around a resource is measurable to a certain degree. But how do we actually document that in a way that's clear and transparent to a person who's a non-expert is a very difficult thing to do. But some of the methods that are being suggested, they're quite interesting, they're novel, they're still hot off the press, so to speak. But I think that's the way the industry is trending.
Yeah. Look, I think, no one's got a perfect crystal ball into the future, but there are a lot of things that are knowable from quite early in a project. And so probably a couple of examples, if you are drilling out an ore body, next to a significant wetlands and your largest NPV pit extends into the wetlands, then I'm not so sure in today's reality that should be your base case, just because it's the biggest profitability, if that risk of not ever being able to be permittable is clear and present. And I'm damn sure you can see the swamp from the drill rig right back at the exploration phase. And so that's an example of, we'll get it through permitting and we'll make that our base case. Maybe these days you've got to pull back. But the flip side is that no one knows what the legislation will be or the community acceptance will be in 5 years' time. And so there's a bit of risk in there that the competent person can declare what the basis is, particularly for the ore reserve, and make it very transparent and fall back on competency and good transparency around the material risks. And if the world changes and some of the material that was in scope falls out of scope, then we're just going to have to adjust on the fly. It is clearly much more difficult to to predict 30 years into the future than maybe perhaps it always was.
Yeah, well, we can see what changes have happened since the JORC 2012 code came out, and they've been significant. So building sufficient flexibility into the system to allow us to respond to community requirements is a key part of this. And as we've seen in some of jurisdictions around the world, if you have a regulatory system that is too rigid, then it can become irrelevant very quickly, and the wrong outcomes are evident. So it's
one of the key changes that we will see implemented is that the word eventual out of reasonable prospects of eventual economic extraction is going to be removed. So we're no longer going to have to say that terribly awkward RP triple E and just call it RP double E. So
and clearly what should have been there all along is that the basis for your reasonable prospect should be it's always material, and there should be better disclosure around it. Okay, so this isn't about rigidly defining what's reasonable, but it's about making sure there's good transparency around your key assumptions. And the fallback position of anything is that you can only have so many prompts in a code. The reasonableness, good transparent disclosure around the key risks, to the project, reflecting your own competence and understanding. So key principles is the main driver in the end. People shouldn't be guessing around, the big ticket items through patchy disclosure. And look, we're in a more complex world. That's the reality. It does make it harder for very long life projects. Maybe the point is, but that the declaring a very large reserve that's 20 years past your payback, I'm not sure why you should stretch your neck in the least comfortable areas, and so you get a chance to update every year. And most people in operating space, that's exactly what they do.
Yeah. So how do we get the word out there? What are the plans? Rod, I know that you're heading off to Singapore next week, and we'll I'm catching up with you in person there. So our next meeting will be in person. So what's the plans for getting around to get the word out?
Look, I think communication will come from the AusIMM and the AIG through their membership is the key, because they're the proponents for the code. And then it'll be about having a fairly high profile for the man here on my right in terms of public announcements and communications through mainstream media, I think, and making sure that we have systems in place to inform the boards of the companies that what are the new regulations and what do they mean, and also informing the regulatory bodies so that they're fully across all of the changes as well.
Yeah. So look, we're probably midway through our engagement, as we had to go through the survey and the working groups to actually get a working draft in front of the next round of public engagement rather than some fuzzy concepts, so people can have a look at the areas that are changing and also clearly see the areas that aren't changing. We'll up the profile on that as we go through the next 3 or 4 months, and towards mid-year a full public comment engagement phase will happen. It's unlikely that the code will then go through final reviews and becoming the new code before much later in the year. It seems to be taking a long time, but it's look, this face-to-face workshop tomorrow is the first time we've had any people in the room for a broad-based open discussion. And so we've broken it up into little working groups, but I'm sure we'll be doing some more of that around the traps in the next couple of months as well.
Yeah. Look, we've got one question come through. There's mining and exploration risk evaluation methods that were put forward by Dominique and Annals and others for Snowden decades ago, using a risk matrix ranking across geological and mining components. A number of projects and deposits have been evaluated by the method. Could it be that this is something that could be incorporated for mineral resource reserves? And are you heading down similar lines, I guess?
I think one of the things that's come back from ASIC, one of the things that we've talked about for a lot of years, as the ASX last time in JORC added extra things they wanted to see in every press release. One of the things that's been missing is a clear and high-level disclosure of the specific risks to the investment opportunity up the front of press releases. And because for some projects, the resource risk is actually fairly low. Sometimes the geology is very kind to us. For others, the mining and processing type risks are actually fairly low and the geological risk is high. Where is that nice, clear disclosure of the key risks ranked around their materiality to the project? That could end up in perhaps as an amendment to the ASX listing rules. We could end up with, well, there are areas in the code we're going to be more explicit around that. That always then makes sure that the investors are informed, right? If it's a material risk and it's hidden in page 8 of table 1 and not highlighted anywhere, that's not very good. And it's almost, it's described to me like hiding it, 2/3 of the way through the phone book, for those people that can remember phone books. Okay. And, that's not meeting the intent of transparency. If it's material, it should be clear and obvious. And so, look, back to that question, I do think that level of what are the 5 things that you should know before you invest your money in here. You shouldn't have to be, Sherlock Holmes to find it in a press release or a company report.
I think that's possibly the area where, the code is most maligned in public reporting by companies, and certainly on the study that Andrew Waltho has been undertaking for the last few months is around what public reporting has looked like and where does it maybe could be improved. And those areas of transparency of risk is certainly one of them that's the biggest stress.
Just remember, in Broad JORC 2012, we didn't even have a table 1 to critique. Now we've had it for 10 years. The balance in it and the risk disclosures, it's clearly areas that there's a better version out there, and that's certainly on the table.
So it's a question.
Yeah, I've got a good question here from Teresa, and it's a focus more on the operations side. So she asks, what would you say are some of the most positive developments in the upcoming JORC code for the operators? So
okay, so I mean, there's going to be a raft, but there's certainly one of the key ones in terms of a clarification in the code for reporting for operations specifically is around reconciliation. So I headed up the working group for suggested changes for the reconciliation part of the code, and it's just going to be a lot more, a lot clearer requirements for companies with operating mines around what reconciliation they need to report and when they need to report it. So I think from the mine point of view, that's a really positive thing, that it will allow the public to be made a lot clearer around performance issues between resource and reserve, or between reserve and operations and production. So that for me is one of the key takeaway changes that will impact operators moving forward.
okay. All right. We've just gone past half an hour at the moment, so I don't see any other questions coming from the floor. So thank you very much, both of you, for taking a bit of time out of the conference schedule. I think it's important for us to start getting the messages out there more often. As I said to Rod, he's and I will be getting together at the Asia Mining Investment Conference in Singapore next week. We're likely to do another session there as we get to understand what the issues are in that region of the world. And then later in the year, we'll be expanding our live presence at various events. So everybody should look out for those in the future.
All right. Thanks very much, Mark.
for your time.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Steve. Cheers. Nice
Talk later.
See you.
Bye.